My name is Perrin, and I have worked for the Health Center for almost 10 years. I started out as a volunteer in 2010, and then I was hired as an employee 2 years later. I have worked in the majority of the Help Center programs, and currently I work as a community educator, which allows me to do presentations like this, and then I also work as the program manager for the Sexual Assault Counseling Center. I also answer our crisis hotlines, which might be the program that people are most familiar with. Do we have the slides back?
Yeah, can you see the slides, Perrin?
I can see the first slide. Can you move to the second?
Great, sorry about that.
Excellent. So today we'll be talking about kind of resiliency and supports available in Gallatin County, but also kind of in moments like this during a pandemic, things that we might want to notice in ourselves, notice in others, and things that we can do. Could you move to the next slide? So I briefly wanted to mention the Help Center specifically and the services we have available. So the one I think that people are most familiar with are our 24-hour hotline services. We answer 3 numbers 24 hours a day. We often joke that we're like the postal service, but we are still available on holidays. So we answer a local hotline number. We also answer the National Information and Referral Line, which is 211. And so if you are in our answering area, which is 13 counties here in Montana, if you dial 211, you will be routed to us. And then we also answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that is also, it's based on phone number. So if you have a local number, you will be routed to us. But if you have an out-of-state number, you will be routed to the call center closest to your phone number. We also provide free counseling and advocacy through our sexual assault counseling center and through our Gallatin County Child Advocacy Center, which works with children and families who have experienced sexual abuse or severe physical abuse. One of our other programs is Hearts and Homes, and we provide parenting support and visitation services through there. And then Saks Thrift. Many people in Bozeman are familiar with Saks Thrift, but they don't know that when you shop there, you actually help keep our services in the community and available to those who might be needing support. A couple of stats I just want to share. Since March 8th, our call volume into the Help Center has gone up 43%. In the beginning, in March, those calls focused primarily on information about COVID-19 and circumstances surrounding COVID-19. Since March, that has gone down. Our call volume continues to be high, but the focus is on mental health crisis now. Next slide, please. So it's important to kind of keep in mind that a pandemic like this, even here in Montana, we haven't had a lot of exposure, or we might not know very many people who have experienced symptoms or have been diagnosed with COVID. We are still inundated through social media, through the news, through our contacts that we have with people in the community, with information that can feel scary or unsure, and the unknown has increased a lot for members of the community. And the unknown has a pretty big effect on us. Our brain sometimes moves into something I like to call like our survival brain. So the part of our brain that tells us we need to, we need to fight something, we need to run from something, or we need to like freeze in place and play dead. Sorry, my note cards. And so we might have an increased fear or about our own health and safety, and we could have increased worry for those we care about. We can experience changes in sleeping patterns, either sleeping too much, and that's kind of the body's way of dealing with the unknown or times of crisis, or not sleeping enough because of the worry or the anxiety. Our eating patterns can change, eating too much or feeling like we're eating a lot, or not eating at all, or not very much at all. Our health problems, our physical health problems, we might see a increase in those chronic conditions. And our mental health, we'll see maybe a change in our anxiety or depression. It's important to remember too that not just adults are experiencing this, kids are very aware. They might not know the specific details or the complexity of these situations, but they're very aware that something is changing and something maybe a little fearful or a little scary is happening. So you can see a change in children's behavior as well. They might regress back to behaviors of a younger age. You'll see maybe an increase in behavioral conflicts. They might be avoiding certain behaviors and activities. So they might have enjoyed school and now they don't want to engage in school in the online process, or they might be avoiding activities that they don't enjoy at all or didn't enjoy before. So like with school, they might not have liked school before, but they definitely aren't as into it now. Or even activities that they enjoyed. So they might have really been into a certain activity and now they're finding it difficult to engage in it. Children also, because sometimes they struggle to express their thoughts because they're young, their brains haven't maybe fully developed to be able to express what they're experiencing, both their thoughts and their emotions actually. They might experience increased physical symptoms. So they might be having more headaches or body pains or not feeling as good, but not really having a reason why. And that can be due to increased stress or anxiety or the uncertainty that children might be experiencing in moments like this. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that these things, like just having the awareness of a pandemic, can have an effect on you. It can affect the way that you think about the world. It can affect the way that you think about yourself, the way that you think about others, the way that you perceive an activity like going to the grocery store because you need food. It's also too important to remember that human beings are social. We are social animals, and having a level of contact helps us feel more prepared and more capable to be out in the world, to do our job, to do the things that we need to do. Some human beings, like there's an argument, right, for extrovert versus introverted, but even people who are introverted have a level of contact with other human beings. And so it's important to notice that isolation can and will affect us depending on the way that we approach ourselves as human beings and the way that we think about others. So you could experience, because of isolation and kind of this fear of the unknown, increased substance use. I know I've seen a lot of videos because I'm on social media, like a lot of joke videos of people making gigantic glasses of a cocktail and drinking wine, and there's been a ton of memes going around about isolation and alcohol consumption specifically. And while some of that is a joke, some of that can be a sign that we're experiencing increased stress, and having that awareness can be really good. Sometimes we can feel more flustered, or I like to call it like fuzzy brained, where you know something, but you can't remember it. So that feeling of like, I know I put my keys somewhere, but I can't remember where I did it. And when you find them, they're in the place that you always put them. So that feeling of maybe being a little uncertain or a little like fuzzy on things. And when that happens, we're more likely to be flustered, right? We're more likely to have moments of feeling flustered or irritated. We can also experience feelings of panic, right? Of intense anxiety, where we're unsure about ourselves, we're unsure about people, we're unsure about the world, how things are going to go. So we can experience these things. And it's important to remember that as a part of the brain, right, the brain has kind of moved us into that survival part where we're possibly trying to figure out how do we best cope with the situation, right? The brain is doing its best to try and make sure that we get out of this situation in the best way possible. So you can experience increased physical health concerns because the brain and the body do this interesting thing, right? When we're in survival mode, it starts pumping a lot of these hormones and chemicals that are supposed to get us out of this situation that feels unsafe or scary or uncertain into a space where we feel that again, where we feel safe, where we feel like we have some say or some control of the world around us. What happens though is in situations like this, we're not really sure of the end date. We might not feel certain about when we feel that again. And because the body is maybe continuing to pump those hormones, it can kind of wear us out. Like increased stress tends to wear us out, and we're more likely to catch colds, or we're more likely to feel unwell because of the increased stress. That all of those processes together put us at an increased risk then of not just physical health symptoms, but mental health symptoms. So we're more likely to experiencing symptoms that are similar to depression, to experience depression, to experience things like anxiety. We also might feel angry or out of control, right? So we're maybe more likely when we're in that survival brain or that uncertain place to lash out in frustration, lash out of irritation, and feel kind of out of control, like we don't have much input on the world around us. We can also have increase in shame. And shame I like to define in the, I'm trying to think if I should define guilt as well. So guilt and shame are two different things. Guilt might be felt in a situation where maybe you've broken a glass or your behavior, you've done something, right? That's guilt. I did that behavior. And the goal of feeling that is to kind of learn the space of, I did that thing. I know now in the future how to do it differently so that doesn't happen again. Shame, however, comes from a place of saying, oh, I did that thing. Maybe I broke that glass or I did that. I'm a bad person. And shame doesn't often or hardly ever lead to growth, where guilt might. The survival brain and the long-term effects of being under stress, it can affect our long-term relationships, especially people that we're still in close contact with, even though we're isolated, because we might be more likely to lash out in irritation. We might be more likely to feel frustrated with the human beings that we're close with. And then numbness in the other direction, right? We might not feel very strongly about anything. We might not feel like we want to engage, just like with kids, right? They might not want to engage in those activities that gave them joy or they felt passionate about, or they helped them feel better in the world. Adults can experience that too. And oftentimes that can feel kind of like a numbness, like a meh, like, yeah, I liked that thing, but now I don't really feel like doing it. We can numb also, like substance use is a way that people sometimes numb the feelings of being out of control or the uncertainty. And one way, kind of a newer way that human beings are numbing is often through maybe social media or kind of a task like social media, engaging in social media. Remembering too that the effects of isolation can affect not just our physical health, but things like sleep, where again, we might be sleeping to numb or sleeping to not feel what's happening in the world around us, or we might not be sleeping very much at all because we feel uncertain and that worry kind of keeps us awake. Eating is something too that can be affected, like I mentioned, right? Where we're maybe eating a lot. This is something that I do. I love eating when I feel stressed because it just like gives me something to do and my body something to do when I'm really stressed. And other times people might not eat at all, right? The focus is I'm just gonna plow through, I'm not gonna think or feel anything. And that survival brain can actually turn off the signals to our body that we're hungry, that we need to eat. So I mention all of these things because it's good to have awareness of where are we, right? If we're kind of in the midst of this situation where things kind of are unknown to some extent, like how things will go, how things will change, when will things kind of return to a space where we feel more safe and comfortable, or a space where we feel like things are more normal. We could experience things like this. So having that awareness is important. because with the awareness, we can then have an idea of what we can do for ourselves and for those around us. Next slide, please. And that awareness kind of brings up this idea of resiliency, right? And so resiliency can be defined in several different ways, but one way I like to think about it and kind of one way that it's defined is that it's made up of several different things, right? It's made up of personality traits, so who you are in the world, um, how you cope with things, how you were taught to cope with things, and then a level of genetics, right? Like how are things passed down through your family in a way of coping. Also things like self-enhancement, um, your emotions and laughter can also be a sign of resiliency, right? Being able to see something in a different way or being able to reframe something. Um, as I said, some of the strongest predictors for resiliency, as the slide shows, are things like environmental contributors. So not just genetic things, but things that you've experienced. So we know that a person who has experienced several traumas throughout their life, or maybe as a young child has experienced trauma, that can affect their ability to cope with additional traumas. Um, Decision making can fall under that category too. It's important to remember, though, that if a person has experienced trauma, their survival brain can influence the way that they make decisions. And that sometimes can be really good because it can send them like an alert, like, oop, this situation is safe. I need to leave this situation. Or the survival brain is kind of numbed any idea of like what is safe and what isn't. And that can affect decision making. Um, Another piece of this that's environmental would be privileges. So the situation that you were kind of born into or the situation that you're currently in can affect how resilient you feel in certain situations. Next slide, please. The other important factor to kind of remember is this kind of newer idea that's growing is post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth is the idea that after we experience adversity and challenges in our life, we can kind of grow from that into a higher level of who we want to be afterwards. It can shift and change the way that we view our worlds, and that can be sometimes a positive thing, or can give us a better way of looking at things or functioning as an individual. It can build strength for future events. So sometimes a person can experience something that is traumatic or rough or scary, overwhelming. And having gotten through that situation and out the other side can give you more confidence in yourself and who you are as a human being. It can also lead to a person accepting that we're vulnerable, right? I have vulnerabilities. There are topics that are hard for me maybe to talk about, or there are situations where it's appropriate to be vulnerable, to share parts of me that maybe feel a little uncertain. And after experiencing adversity, you can potentially have a clearer idea of when it's okay to be vulnerable, who it's okay to share vulnerabilities with, and that you are vulnerable. One thing that can come from post-traumatic growth, the experience of growing out of adversity, is seeing new possibilities, right? Seeing things in yourself or in others, changes in relationships, hopefully for the better, for the healthy, right? Feeling more comfortable and confident in who you are in a relationship and expressing vulnerabilities or needs in a relationship. Um, the kind of paradoxical view that you're both stronger but more vulnerable. Because oftentimes, especially in work that I do in counseling with my clients, is talking about how vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean that you're weak, right? Showing vulnerability to those that you care about can be a strength and is a strong thing to do. You might have a greater appreciation for who you are in the world and for life as a whole. And it can change both your individual spiritual and kind of like your existential view of the world. So kind of the view around you. For post-traumatic growth, kind of the image that I like to call up are things like trees, right? Trees have to grow and change and adapt to their environment. Like trees on windy mountainsides have to grow and adapt to that situation so that they can grow stronger. And so that's an image I tend to call upon when I think about post-traumatic growth as a way of defining that for me. The kind of the difference between resiliency and post-traumatic growth is that resiliency might focus more on like the events themselves and maybe things that you came into the world with, right? Like personality traits and things like that. Versus post-traumatic growth is the growth that human beings are capable of. So being able to look at a situation that is stressful, that could be overwhelming, that has the unknown, like the pandemic has, and being able to kind of look at a situation and look at oneself and say, okay, what am I experiencing right now? How can I take care of myself? How can I take care of those around me? And how can I grow and move through this situation? One way too is that sometimes if a person views themselves as having a really high resiliency, excuse me, they can kind of tolerate toughness, like tough times. So like a situation like the pandemic or an adverse situation, right? A situation that's tough, that's overwhelming, and tolerate it and kind of just like, I'm just going to be a rock and I'm going to move through this situation. And that gets them through it, but that doesn't allow any growth for the human, right? That doesn't allow us any growth to move through a situation. Next slide, please. So it's important that we recognize, right, that in this situation, we are handling more than we ever did before, right? We're having to think about, you know, if I'm furloughed or laid off, or if I lose my job, what does that mean for my family, right? Families now are having to not just maybe work from home, if you're able to work from home, but you're having to work from home, parent, make sure that your kid gets their homework done, you know, doing all of that work in a single day where before we maybe weren't handling as much. And it's stressful, right? Handling even one of those things can be stressful. And now having to handle a lot more and having to answer questions and try and explore and figure out the unknown, that's a lot more than maybe we have done in the past. It can be stressful financially, right? As I said, like concerns about jobs. What are things going to look like in a couple of months? How are things going to be going? Balancing all those tasks, right? Trying to figure out how to do all the work from home, trying to figure out how to parent and be a teacher, and then also try and carve out time maybe for yourself or for you and your partner or for you and your kid to have fun together, right? That can create stress to try and figure out how to do all those things. And that you're human, right? We're all human beings, and human beings are affected by situations like this. We all respond individually and maybe different, but we all can be affected by this. And that's okay. It's okay to be stressed out by having to figure all these things out. You know, we're all experiencing a level of stress that is new. And in situations like this, even if we're isolated, we're not alone. That there are people who are willing to be there with us, that we have friends or family members who are willing to hop on a FaceTime or a Zoom meeting and we can chat. And that all of us are experiencing something because of this situation. Next slide, please. So things that we can do, right? Things to notice, right? We need to notice all the things that I've mentioned before. How are we being affected by this experience, right? How are we experiencing this? And then what'll be good for us, right? One thing in general, because human beings are social, we're kind of a pack animal, if you will, we need to stay connected. However, that feels good for us, right? Staying connected with friends, families, with resources that might be able to support us. Doing things that we enjoy. Now, Animal Crossing is a video game, and I mention it only because I know so many people who are like, I'm coping by playing this video game. And that's okay. If playing Animal Crossing or playing a video game helps you get through kind of the numbness or the stress of this situation, a way of unwinding, that's okay. It's also important to maybe not just stay inside the whole time working or playing a video game. Engage with nature. Nature can feel really good, right? The sun, we need vitamin D. We're in Montana. We're moving into the months where we get vitamin D, but we've been deficient. It's been snowy and dark for months. So going outside, going for walks, sitting in the sun, going for drives, doing things that kind of remind us of where we live, not just staying stuck in our houses. I would mention, though, doing that in a safe social distance way, maintaining the safety for our own health, but also the health of the community around us. Creating things. Having a creative outlook can really boost kind of our dopamine, right? The hormones and the things that help us feel good and satisfied with ourselves. So having something that we feel like we can create, something that we can build or engage in. And even if that's like just planning something and maybe not even engaging in it, but just the idea of thinking about creating something. So the idea of thinking about creating a garden can help us feel more safe and more confident in who we are in these times. Having a hobby, right? If we have time, having something that helps us feel like we're engaging in something that feels good, right? That brings us joy, that brings us something different than maybe the uncertainty or the worry. And remember, we don't have to do everything, right? Like if today you don't have time to do a hobby, if there are tons of other things happening, right? If you didn't get the dishes done, if you didn't vacuum this week, right? Remembering that we don't have to do everything all at once. We can take things as they come and we can engage in the things that help us feel more secure. Next slide, please. And remembering that there are resources. So in our community, we're actually quite lucky that there are tons of resources who are willing to support. And at the very beginning in March, there were so many resources that popped up on social media and people who were willing to support and help with picking up items if someone needed them. So remembering that those things are available and possible. And so supports, like I mentioned, connecting with friends and family, social distancing, but still being connected, maybe doing it through technology. I have a friend who's a member of a writing group, and their last couple of meetings they've done in a social distance way. So they've gathered, but they've been 6 to like 10 feet apart, and they get together and they write and they engage in supporting each other, but doing it in a social distance way. And then using technology, right? Staying connected through things like social media, staying connected through Zoom, staying connected through any way that feels good. If that's maybe writing letters, making phone calls, things like that. Social media groups, there are tons of ways of volunteering and supporting the community. And that's one way where we can feel like we're contributing or maybe having some kind of control over the situation, is maybe supporting the community. And there are great groups on Facebook that are offering volunteer opportunities and organizing those. And there's also a website, volunteermontana.org, that if you're wanting to engage and be connected in that way, that's possible. Remembering that support groups, most are still available. They're just offering supports now through online, right? So groups like AA or NA are still available, but online. Bozeman Health has support groups that they offer, and those are still running as well, and they are done online. and then NAMI. NAMI is an organization that offers support for those who are experiencing mental health symptoms, and they are running support groups online as well. There's also the local resources, so places like the Help Center. So if you have questions, if you are needing a resource and you're not really sure who to call, if you just want to talk about what you're experiencing, the Help Center is available 24 hours a day, and they can be there to support you. The National Suicide Lifeline. So if you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide or you think they might be, you could call that number and talk with someone. Talk about your own thoughts of suicide or your concerns for someone around you. The Gallatin Mental Health Center is still open and available and offering mental health supports through telehealth, so through online meetings. Community health partners, I didn't include a phone number because they have offices in Belgrade, Bozeman, and Livingston, and they are still providing telehealth services. They are still providing physical health services as well. So just checking in with a doctor if you're feeling like you're having physical symptoms, either due to stress or mental health. Haven provides support for those experiencing relationship violence, domestic violence. They're still available, providing resources. And then Bozeman Health with the Western Montana Mental Health, Gallatin Mental Health, and the Help Center have kind of built an urgent care. So for those persons who are experiencing mental health symptoms or needing support can still seek services in crisis without maybe having to enter the ER if there's a concern with exposure to COVID-19. And so there are resources that are available and who want to support. If you have any questions or any concerns or wanting to reach out. Many mental health counselors in the community, if you have a private insurance, are providing still in-person support and telehealth support. So there are tons of resources available if you're wanting support. Next slide. Thank you so much. I was a little nervous. This is the first time I've done like a virtual presentation. So thank you so much for being willing to come and share in this space.
Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. We will be hosting 3 more in May with the potential of continuing on in June and July. So thank you so much for attending today. And if you have any questions, reach out to us at communitybenefit@bozemanhealth.org. We'll be able to answer any questions. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.